Mackenzie Johnston with Tri-State Livestock News, bringing you discussions concerning fair cattle markets. Today we have the opportunity to chat with Steve Stratford of Pratt Livestock. We've seen the cattle markets take a steep dive this week. How has this affected your sales there at Pratt Livestock?
You know, it's affected the calves more than the yearlings. I would say this week in the yearling market, we were 5 to 10 cheap. That's, of course, the less desirable cattle got hit hardest. Yearling stayed in there better than I would have thought. You know, we sold 9-weight steers still up to the 140 level, which shocks me. People are willing to do that. Heifers probably were more cheaper through the week than the steers compared to the week before. The calf market's what's drastically getting hit. Those yards don't want to mess with the calves in the first place. And you know, the best 650-pound steer that 2-3 weeks ago would have brought 152. You know, we kind of trade early in the week at 31 to 35.
When do you think this market's going to find a bottom?
With no volume in the CME's future market right now, and producers don't normally buy it. So there's not any buyers there without the funds and the commercials. So my guess is that they're not going to step in there and buy this market until we find out who president is. So my guess is it's going to be really hard to gain any traction till after the election.
You just mentioned the CME. What are your thoughts on these expanded limits, these increased expanded limits that we now have?
You know, I guess you're going to have to tell me if it's supposed to be a pricing tool for end users and for producers to hedge risk and forward price your product. I don't know that I can really see that there was a need to expand the limits in the extent they did. If it's a gambling platform for day traders and computers and algorithms, then I guess they expanded the limits so they can make it wild and furious, you know.
Right.
As a hedging tool, and if that's what it was used for, and everybody that traded it had to have a stake in the product, I don't see that the limits probably needed to be expanded. From an auction standpoint, it's going to be a nightmare. I mean, you know, you be 120, 140, 150 lower, and you go through the right on the right graph, and you're going to lock limit. Well, we have 4,000 or 5,000 cattle in a sale barn, and trying to get through them, and it's lock limit at 10 in the morning. That's going to be pretty tough sledding. I mean, it's got to where it's a monumental move per head, you know, and it's going to be a challenge.
Last time we talked, we discussed negotiated cash trade and how we needed to increase that. Do you think we've increased negotiated cash trade or gained any ground in our live cattle markets with that?
Oh, I think since probably we talked, if you go back and look at the numbers, we traded more cash cattle in the last 4 months or whatever than we had month to month for the previous years. That was a derivative of cattle larger, fear of yield grade 4s and 5s. In the next 2-3 months and 8 months from now, I think we're going to be backwards in the cash trade from where we talked. The yards that I deal with, big yards that were all cash yards, are now strictly grid. There's a couple, 3 small yards that haven't had any cash cattle for 3 weeks. All grid cattle. So, you know, I think in 6 months from now, we'll have 30% less of the cash trade than we did prior to COVID.
NCBA came out this week with their recommendations for voluntary increased negotiated cash trade. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I think that's a farce. I mean, honestly, you go through there. I mean, what's the 75% mean? I mean, the only thing I can figure out that they even picked that number for, so it looked bigger to people that don't understand, than the 50-14 plan. I mean, I guess that's a good marketing or advertising ploy for them. Man, it's not 75% of shit. If you do the math all the way out, I mean, it ends up about 8% of the cattle a year traded in the cash market. I'd like any other business. I'd like somebody to tell me any other business that trades their product like that. So I don't know. I think it's an absolute joke. And then throwing on top of that the voluntary part. So we're going to voluntarily market 8.25% of the cattle that we feed every year in the cash market, and every grid formula, so on and so forth, is going to be priced off those 8%. I guess I don't sign up that that's a real good deal.
What are your thoughts on the recent foot and mouth disease outbreak in Namibia and USDA's decision to continue to import beef from that country?
Well, I suppose the USDA's decision is based off the fact that, you know, the meat's not going to carry it. And I'm not smart enough to argue whether that's possible, impossible, or in between. So I'm going to default to the fact that I guess we've proven over the years that we're not at risk for it through the meat. Why? I mean, is it a surprise to me? Should it be a surprise to anybody? I mean, the imports are a real problem for me because we take imports from countries that don't have to spend the money and stay to the standards that the U.S. producers do. We willy-nilly go in there and approve this country or that country because it's part of a trade deal, or we want to rub their back for some reason. You know, I don't think we have a clue what any of those countries' disease problems could be. Do I think because we're going to keep getting beef from them, will we get foot and mouth through that? Probably not. But if that country has foot and mouth and we're not inspecting those plants like we would if they were here, what could come in the meat? And if that happens, guess what that falls on? The U.S. producer. I mean, when it's in the headlines of the papers and it's all over the news and they're recalling it out of stores, it's beef. It's not, oh, we screwed up and brought it from here. U.S. beef's good. Nobody worry about it. Keep going to the store. So, you know, we're going to take the blunt of that if there's a problem, and they use that meat to leverage our product and keep our price down. So it looks like it's a double lose for the U.S. producer to me.
Since we last talked, USDA has come out and said that they would like to implement RFID tags by 2023 across the cattle industry. What are your thoughts on this?
A, it's impossible. B, Pratt happens to be one of the pilot program barns, and we have a reader. We've got stacks of boxes of tags that the corporates were going to put in on so many cattle, and you know, so on and so forth. They're still in the back collecting dust. I have met with the people that are coming out to try to get sale barns on board for it. The Winters or Mark agreed to be a pilot barn. Not that we agree with it or want it or think we're going to implement it industry wide, but we wanted to be in the conversation of why it won't work for us, why it won't work for our producers. I guess to explain that a little further, they came to the sale barns with the simplistic idea that, oh, it's no big deal. You guys will just put the tags in the ones that are untagged. So we're a relatively major market. We sell 170,000 cattle a year. That varies 2,000 to 7,000 a week. So it's going to fall back on sale barns to staff enough people in case we get 7,000 uncalved tags this week. But next week, we've got those same amount of people there, and we have 2,700, and 2,500 of those are tagged. You know, there's no way to staff employees to do that, and it not be so cost prohibitive passing it on to the producer. And it hurts the smaller producer worse. You know, those 70 and 80-year-old husband and wives that still have 50 cows that can't even pre-wean those calves, vaccinate those calves. Now we're going to tell them they're required to have a tag in them. Well, they're not going to do it. They're going to drop them at us. We're going to have to charge them some exorbitant amount to do it because we got to staff people all the time to do it, whether they're needed or not, in case they're needed. And those people are going to quit because of it. Not to mention, if the government or a problem down the line will let us know within 48 hours, we can trace cattle like you can't believe, and we can do it fast. The problem is, if there's a problem, they come back 60 days later and say, oh, you had, then we can't. So I think in the way they think you're going to implement it, and the simplistic approach that, oh, we can do this, they probably need to tour Southeast United States and look at facilities and sale barns and the size of the producers. Look at all the bull calves with swinging nuts down there that they don't even have a facility to castrate them. And they think they're going to put in this, nice yellow dangly tag. I think they got the cart before the horse with the 2023 date.
What are your thoughts on the recent fines against Pilgrim's Pride for price fixing in the chicken industry, and also the fines against JBS for their bribery scheme?
I guess to start with the obvious, I'm glad we figured it out and they got caught and we fined them. Now, the fines that we assess them would be like fining you and me $1,500. If I was out here on the corner peddling drugs, I would get fined a much larger percentage of my profit doing what I was doing illegally than they did. So, I kind of think the fines are insignificant. I think in retrospect, they made so much money doing what they were doing, they're probably glad to pay the fine and move on down the road. Am I glad we looked at it? Am I glad they got caught? Yeah. Does that make them more wary going forward? Yeah, maybe.
Do you think we're going to hear anything anytime soon from the DOJ regarding the investigation into our big four beef packers?
I doubt it will be soon. And I doubt it's got any teeth in it when it happens. We haven't had one yet that has. I'm not going to hold a lot of faith in that. That's going to be a big revelation.
You've been a strong advocate for the beef checkoff referendum. Can you elaborate on why you think the industry needs this and how cattle producers are paying into a program that isn't representing their best interests?
Well, I'm going to start out by clarifying that in the mid 80s, I think the beef checkoff was a great program. And I think it did us a lot of good for a decade or so when we needed it. We'll make a comparison here that I think is really good as far as the checkoff goes, but let's compare it to a class action lawsuit. As long as there's 500 people with the same end goal, you can use the same lawyer and split the costs and split the reward. And that's what I would say it was in 1985. We had, in the 80s, 90s, we had an oversupply. We had average per capita consumption coming down. We had a problem, and we needed to get the customers back, and the checkoff did a good job of that. And I think it worked from top to bottom at that point. You go back to that time frame, you're probably talking about packer margins from $10 to $75 a head profit. I have to look to quote you exactly, but I think it did a good job. Now, if you use that same comparison, you've got large corporate feeders and packers, and all these producers are paying it, and the packers' margins have expanded. We can't use the same lawyer anymore. We're not on the same side. If the producers are going to pay into something to support their product, which I would contend in 1985, the cow-calf producer's product is beef. Today, the cow-calf producer's product's a calf because we've lost any margin in the beef. You know, we sell that calf, and from then on, the corporates and the packers steal it from the producer. So we can no longer use the same lawyer. We can no longer use the same checkoff. You know, the end goal is not the same. The reward's not the same for the producer. And so the producer dollars, and again, it's kind of like the fines for Pilgrim's Pride and JBS. You know, it sounds like a lot of money to pilgrims like you and me, 40, 50 million a year. That's nothing to the four major packers. If it does that much good for them, why don't they split it up and pay it? And the producers pay a check off that goes to fight for their rights.
Earlier, you mentioned that the cattle market most likely won't straighten out until we get past this election. What are your thoughts on this election heading into it? How do you see agriculture being affected if Biden gets elected or if Trump continues on with a second term?
You know, markets are so volatile when we make major moves one way or the other. My guess is if Biden gets elected, the Dow is going to take a really big dump for a few days. I'm sure oil will be on the defensive really hard for a few days. Funny thing about the Dow and oil, cattle follow them down. They don't have to follow them up, but they almost always follow them down. And so I suppose it would really pressure the cattle market also. Now, I would think with the low volume and the negativity and as much ground as we have lost, hopefully some of that's already in there. And with that said, if Trump gets elected, I'm sure the Dow gets a boost, oil get a boost, and then hopefully the confidence comes back and the funds come back into the meats, which is sad. I mean, there's nobody to buy the board. So, you know, as producers out here, it can go down, 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 down until the funds decide it's cheap enough to buy it and run it back up. Well, that's all fine and dandy if you have enough cattle that you can hedge, if you're comfortable with hedging, if you have a banker that'll stay with you on hedges. But if you're the guy with 35 to 75 cows and there's not even a hedgeable contract on the CME for you, it puts you in a real bad spot. If you're marketing your calves on October 29th, I guess I don't think Mr. and Mrs. Bob Smith should have to try to go to the CME and buy the April live cattle futures when they sell their calves to stay in the market. When boxed beef's at, 209 today, whatever it was, fat steer's worth 132. I don't think it's a fair and equitable market all the way down.
What do you see the market, how do you see them playing out heading into 2021? The feeder market, the live cattle market, as we head into the new year, do you think we're going to gain some strength, or do you have any thoughts?
If we can get the election behind us and if Trump's the president, I think we gain some strength. Winter starting early, that'll help the D's through April markets. Now, if you're feeding in a region that gets slammed by weather, does it help you as much as it hurts you? It's probably a push. But you'll start to get a weather premium in the markets with the scares and with winter starting early. Funds can come in thinking it's going to be a bad winter. Bad winter will take pounds off the market. A short-term negative, and some of why besides the fat board eroding, but some of why the yearlings and calves have come under pressures because corn's rallied so much. Now, short-term cattle you bought 30, 40 days ago, if you didn't protect the price on your corn, that's going to be a negative. The next 12 months for the cattle market, no wheat pasture and higher corn is usually healthy for the cattle market. It'll take a lot of pounds off the market. And it spreads those cattle out so much. If there's widespread wheat pasture, we make them huge in the country. We place them all in March to May. It lets them get the fat market so depressed in August through October, then it takes us 4 months to come out of it, $1 or $2, $3 a week at a time. So I think the calf crop's a lot smaller than even the USDA has finally gotten it down to. If you'll notice in every inventory report, they keep whacking it. They were way wrong, 6 months ago. It sure looks to me like in the regions I trade in, the calf crop is smaller than a year ago. And if we don't add extra pounds on wheat pasture and corn stays where it's at, we won't overfeed cattle. I think it could be really healthy, and we know the demand's excellent. I mean, the demand's crazy. Mm-hmm. So if we can hold the demand in there and get some pounds off the market, I think 2021 could be pretty good.
Do you have any closing statements or anything else you want to touch on?
I don't. I'd like to thank all the people that are trying to get the Checkoff petition going. We've got a lot of people working on the ground and working hard at it now. I think it's gaining steam. The sad thing is when we initiated that, we had a lot of steam and a lot of people behind it. And then the government sent out the checks. The feeder market and the calf market got kind of good there. And, July, August, September, and everybody went away. Yeah. It was like problem was solved. Now, with the calf market plummeting, now you're starting to get help again. So on the positive side, we got a lot of people working hard at it. A lot of people paying attention to it. On the negative side is we can't get producers to fight for themselves or unite unless they're flat broke. Yeah. And that's why we're in the shape we're in. I mean, we've all resided that we'll do it for nothing. Mm-hmm. So everybody's happy as long as they're breaking even. So I think the time to fight for it's now, and hopefully we can make some headway and get it done.